Thad. Stepping off the private jet, she watched the groom's smile shatter. He thought he had erased her to build his empire, never expecting her to arrive with his 3 unknown heirs. What happens when a buried truth returns to reclaim everything? Pristine glass walls of the Apex building reflected a billion-dollar future, but Maya's entire life was currently reduced to a single, taped-up cardboard box. At 31, she stood in the center of the stiflingly immaculate lobby, the cold marble seeping through the soles of her shoes. Just minutes ago, the company's lead attorney had handed her an envelope. Inside was a divorce petition, Vieira. Right beneath it lay a copy of the intellectual property assignment she had signed weeks ago, back when she thought she was merely helping Liam restructure shares for their upcoming IPO. She hadn't been securing their future. She had been signing away her soul. The quiet chime of the private executive elevator broke the silence. Liam stepped out. He wore a custom suit that cost more than the first car they ever owned. His face, usually deranged to a charismatic smile, for investors, was in a blank as he approached her sternly. There was no apology in his eyes. Only the cold, calculating triumph of a man who had successfully extracted everything he needed. The security badges have been deactivated, Liam said, his voice low enough not to draw the attention of the passing executives. The settlement is generous, Maya. Sign the papers, take the money, and quietly move on. Victoria and I want a clean slate before the board bell rings on Wall Street. Next month, Victoria, the senator's daughter, the perfect, politically connected bride for a newly minted tech billionaire. She stared at the man she had loved, the man she had built this empire for, and felt the breath knock out of her lungs. The betrayal was so absolute, so flawlessly executed, that it left no room for tears. She didn't scream, feel. She didn't throw the box. She possessed a fierce, quiet pride that refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. She turned her back on him and walked toward the revolving glass doors, her spine perfectly straight. Days later, the bright California morning had surrendered to a bleak, biting evening rain. Maya sat alone on the damp wooden bench of an empty train station on the edge of the valley. The cold wind whipped through the open platform, but she barely felt it. Her mind pulled her backward, away from the glittering skyscrapers and down into the damp, poorly lit garage where Apex was born. 8 years, the end. 8 years of typing lines of core code until her fingers cramped and her vision blurred, while Liam pitched her genius to venture capitalists as his own. She remembered the sheer exhaustion of those nights, made heavier by the constant suffocating presence of her mother-in-law, Eleanor, with her pearls and her country club sneer, standing in the doorway of that garage. A tech visionary needs a wife with pedigree, Liam, Eleanor had whispered loudly enough for Maya to hear. Not some charity case from an orphanage who thinks typing a keyboard makes her an equal. She's just a leech, a placeholder, Theon. Maya closed her eyes against the sting of the memory. She hadn't been a leech, she had been the architect. She had given up her own career trajectory, swallowed every insult, poured her brilliance into the foundation of a company that was now poised to make billions, and they had erased her with the stroke of a pen. A harsh gust of wind scattered a few drops of rain onto her lap. Maya opened her eyes and looked down at the box resting beside her. Slowly, with numb fingers, she reached into her coat pocket. She didn't pull out the divorce papers. Instead, she withdrew a small, folded piece of glossy paper, her sound photo. She smoothed the creases with her thumb. 3 tiny, pulsing shapes, triplets. A miracle she had planned to share with Liam over a celebratory dinner tonight. Now, looking at the grainy black and white image, her crushing weight of her isolation threatened to pull her under. She was completely erased, penniless, and pregnant with the children of a man who had just discarded her for a political alliance. But as she stared at the 3 tiny lives growing inside her, the overwhelming shock began to harden into something else. The quiet submission she had worn for 8 years shattered. A cold, protective instinct flared in her chest. She wasn't just a discarded wife anymore. She was a mother. Headlights cut through the rainy darkness. A sleek, luxury black car slowed near the station entrance across the street, and through the downpour, Maya recognized Liam in the back seat, probably heading to a celebratory gala with his new fiancée. He didn't even look out the window. Maya stood alone in the cold Silicon Valley rain, trembling hand moving to rest protectively over her stomach. She watched Liam's car speed away into the night, leaving her with nothing but the rain-soaked divorce papers. The scent of roasted coffee beans and old paper filled the quiet suburban cafe, offering a sharp, comforting contrast to the sterile cold glass of the corporate world Maya had just been thrown out of. It was barely noon. The exhaustion of the previous rainy night still settled deep into her bones. She sat in a secluded corner booth, her damp coat draped over the back of the chair. Across the small wooden table sat Mr. Harrison. In the cutthroat circles of the Tech Valley, his name was a quiet legend, a venture capitalist who moved markets with a single nod. Yet today, sitting in the warm, dim light, he didn't look like a ruthless titan. He looked like a patient, protective guardian carrying a heavy secret. Maya kept her arms crossed, her posture rigid, sound. Her mind was still spinning from the shock of the divorce papers and the realization that Liam had legally stolen 8 years of her life's work. She had no energy left for another corporate game. If Liam sent you here to offer me a quiet settlement, Mr. Harrison, you can tell him to save his breath, Maya said, her voice tight and guarded. I have nothing left for him to take. Mr. Harrison offered a gentle smile. He didn't pull out a non-disclosure agreement. Instead, he reached into his worn leather briefcase and placed a thick, aged folder onto the table. Liam doesn't know I am here, Maya, Harrison said, his voice steady and calm. And quite frankly, Liam is a small, foolish man who has no idea what he just threw away. I am not here for him. I am here to fulfill a promise I made 25 years ago. Maya stared at the folder, pensive wall faltering. A promise to who? To your father. The air in her lungs simply vanished. Maya sat entirely still. Growing up in a crowded orphanage, she had always believed she was a nobody, a discarded mistake. For the last 8 years, Eleanor, her mother-in-law, had made sure to remind her of that supposed fact at every family dinner. A charity case, Eleanor used to whisper. A leech clinging to a brilliant man. My father? Fest. Maya whispered, the words feeling foreign on her tongue. Harrison opened the folder, revealing yellowed documents and blueprints of early network architecture. Father was one of the most brilliant software engineers of his generation. He built the foundation for systems that are still running today. But he trusted the wrong partners. They stole his work, pushed him out, ruined his name. Harrison paused, his eyes reflecting a deep, old grief. Before he passed, he entrusted me with the only things he had left. A massive trust fund, secured and hidden, Vita, waiting for the day you turned 30, or the day you found yourself abandoned. And, with nothing, Maya reached out, her trembling fingers brushing the edge of the old documents. The cold, placating shadow of Eleanor's mockery began to dissolve, cracking open to let the light in. She wasn't an imposter. The endless strings of flawless code she had written in that damp garage for Liam weren't a lucky accident. The genius wasn't a fluke. It was her birthright. It was in her blood. She was the daughter of a pioneer, and her brilliant mind was the only real asset Liam had ever possessed. A fierce, protective warmth bloomed in her chest. He slowly reached into her pocket and pulled out the small, glossy ultrasound photo. She laid it gently on the wooden table, right beside her father's blueprints. 3 tiny shapes. 3 new lives. Harrison looked down at the image. The legendary investor's eyes softened completely, a look of profound respect and quiet joy washing over his face. The intersection of a lost legacy and a newly discovered future rested right there between them on the table. I cannot just walk away, Maya said, her voice no longer trembling. The exhaustion was gone, replaced by a crystalline, razor-sharp clarity. Liam built his empire on my mind. He is going to ring the bell on Wall Street using my architecture. I will not let the father of these children build their inheritance on a lie. Harrison smiled, a slow, proud curve of his lips. He understood. The woman sitting across from him was no longer a victim. She was a sovereign, reclaiming her territory. He reached into his coat pocket and brought out a heavy, vintage metal USB drive. Beetle. It clinked softly as he set it on the table. When your father was forced out, he didn't leave them with everything, Harrison explained, his tone shifting into something authoritative and deeply serious. This drive contains his final, unpublished encryption algorithms. The master key, combined with the backdoor you already coded into Liam's current framework, it is enough to dismantle everything they stole. The silence in the cafe felt suddenly electric. Maya looked at the metal drive, understanding the sheer, devastating power it held. It wasn't just a piece of hardware, it was a weapon forged across 2 generations of stolen genius. Mr. Harrison looked directly into Maya's eyes, pushing the classic USB drive across the table, declared that it was finally time for her to take back what this was still owed her father, and what it owed her. The weight of the vintage metal USB drive felt completely different now. As Maya slid it into the port of her battered, old laptop, the screen flickered to life, casting a stark, blue glow across the sleek glass tables of Mr. Harrison's private underground laboratory. It was well past midnight, but the crushing exhaustions that had weighted her down for weeks had evaporated. In its place was a cold, absolute focus. She was not alone in the quiet, minimalist room. Ethan stood a few feet away, his arms crossed, as he watched the sprawling lines of code reflect in her dark eyes. That Harrison had brought him into the fold. A master systems architect with an impeccable reputation. Because having her father's master key was only half the battle. Apex upgraded their firewall protocols just 3 days ago, Ethan said, his voice a calm, steady anchor in the silent room. Liam's security team added multiple layers of encryption in preparation for the IPO. If we try to push your father's algorithm through any standard entry point, you'll with an immediate system lockdown before it ever reaches the core. Mafia's fingers hovered over the worn keyboard, the very same keyboard she had tirelessly typed on in that damp, poorly lit garage for 8 years. Her shoulders were tense, her posture fiercely guarded. The trauma of Liam's betrayal had built a thick wall around her. In this valley, and with power, usually looked at her, either as a naive charity case or a resource to be quietly exploited. She wasn't about to hand over her mind to anyone ever again. We aren't going through any standard entry points, Thea replied, her tone sharp and uncompromising. I built the foundation of that house. I know exactly where the floorboards creak. Ethan stepped closer, but crucially, he didn't reach for her keyboard. He didn't attempt to take over or explain her own creation to her. Instead, he kept a respectful distance and simply asked, "Show me." With a few rapid, practiced keystrokes, Thea bypassed the main interface and brought up a deeply hidden directory. It is a backdoor. I buried it deep within the server logic years ago, long before Liam ever thought to force me out. But I cannot do this alone. I need you to build a bridge between my old access points and their new network protocol. If you can construct the infrastructure to mask our IP relay, I can deploy the payload without setting off a single alarm. Ethan leaned in, his eyes tracking the intricate, elegant logic scrolling across her screen. For a long moment, the only sound in the lab was the low, steady hum of the mainframes. Then, a slow, genuine smile spread across his face. Architecture. It is absolutely flawless, Maya. The sheer reverence in his voice made her hands go still. For nearly a decade, she had been dismissed by Eleanor as a leech, treated by Liam as an invisible ghost in the machine. Now, a highly respected architect was looking at her life's work with unadulterated awe. He wasn't trying to steal her light, indeed. He was offering to help her build a stage for it. As they worked through the quiet hours of the night, the heavy, defensive armor Maya had worn began to fracture. They moved in perfect intellectual synchrony, seamless dance between 2 brilliant minds. Ethan meticulously built the secure, invisible tunnels, and Maya wove her father's devastating encryption algorithm straight into the heart of her back door. She felt a profound, exhilarating sense of reclamation. She was no longer a victim, waiting in the rain. She was commanding the board. In the brief moments of quiet, she rested a hand over her stomach. a silent promise to the 3 lives growing safely inside her. They would never have to know a mother who stayed broken. By 3 in the morning, the final command line was written. Maya hit the enter key. Progress bar flashed on the cracked screen, loading swiftly before turning a solid, glowing green. The override was securely embedded deep within the Apex system, a silent, invisible trap waiting patiently for her signal field. Ethan leaned back against the edge of the desk. His gaze drifted from the cascading lines of the lethal code on the monitor directly to the woman who had just written them. He looked at Maya, his expression, an intense mixture of profound professional reverence and a rapidly deepening, undeniable infatuation. Watching the brilliant logic reflecting in her eyes, Ethan realized, with absolute certainty, that her ex-husband had just made the most catastrophic mistake of his life. He had betrayed the most dangerous genius in the world. The quiet hum of the underground servers faded into the past, replaced by the clinking of crystal glasses under the brilliant California sun. It was a flawless afternoon in Napa Valley. Liam stood at the head of the long, feared lawn of a billionaire's private vineyard, raising a glass of vintage champagne. Beside him stood Victoria, a picture of political perfection in her designer gown, and a few steps away, Eleanor beamed. The older woman's pearls gleamed as she proudly rubbed shoulders with the true tech elite, finally securing the high society status she had always craved. Apex was set to go public in less than 48 hours. Surrounded by wealth and applause, Liam believed he had successfully rewritten history. He thought he had won the world. He never even saw the shadow until the roar of jet engines drowned out the elegant string quartet. A sleek, white private aircraft touched down on the estate's adjoining private airstrip, the sunlight catching its polished wings as it rolled to a smooth halt just behind the wedding pavilion. The guests fell silent, lowering their champagne flutes and turning their heads as the cabin door opened and the stairs slowly descended and stepped out into the golden light. She was breathtaking, her long lilac gown flowing in the warm breeze, radiating the absolute quiet power of a woman who had walked through the fire and emerged untouched. Ethan walked beside, impeccably dressed in a dark blue suit, his hand firmly and proudly holding hers. But it was the 3 children confidently walking just ahead of them, 2 little boys in sharp miniature suits and a little girl in a matching purple dress, that made the air leave the valley. The down on the grass, the illusion shattered instantly. Liam's confident smile collapsed, his face contorting in sheer, unadulterated horror as he stared at the woman he had erased, now holding the hands of the children he hadn't even known existed beside him. Victoria's eyes went wide, her fingers going limp as her expensive bridal bouquet dropped silently to the manicured lawn. Eleanor let out a strangled gasp, her hands flying up to cover her mouth, face draining of all color as she recognized the leech she had thrown out, now standing above them like royalty. Maya didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Looking down at the man who had stolen 8 years of her genius, she calmly pulled her mobile phone from her clutch. With the precision of the master architect she had always been, she tapped the screen once. Kill switch was activated. It took less than 10 seconds. Liam's phone vibrated violently in his tuxedo pocket. Then Eleanor's buzzed. Within moments, a lumber ripple of frantic notifications swept through the crowd of investors and board members. The backdoor had executed flawlessly. Apex's core algorithm was rapidly dissolving into digital ash, and right alongside it, faded email containing the undeniable, time-stamped proof of Liam's intellectual property theft flooded every executive inbox. Victoria didn't wait for the explanations. She was a politician's daughter, Fiona. She recognized a sinking ship the moment it took on water. Without a single word or a glance backward, she pulled the heavy diamond ring from her finger, dropped it onto a cocktail table, and walked away from the altar. Fuller's knees gave out, her desperate social climbing turning into a public humiliating freefall as the guests began to murmur and turn away. Liam fell to his knees on the grass, a hollow, ruined man reaching out toward a family that belonged to someone else. He had traded a brilliant mind and genuine love for a hollow shell, and now he was left with absolutely nothing. Thea didn't offer him a single word of anger or pity. She simply turned around, her hand still resting safely in Ethan's, and led her children back into the plane. The debt was paid in full. A few years later, the morning sun poured warmly into the spacious kitchen of a beautiful, tree-lined villa. The room was a chaotic, joyful symphony of family life. The triplets were at the breakfast table, their laughter filling the air as scrambled eggs somehow made their way onto the floor. Miles away, in a cramped, silent room, Liam sat entirely alone. Stripped of his company, his wealth, and his reputation, the only thing he had left was the cold glow of his phone screen. On it was a news article celebrating Ethan and Maya's latest philanthropic tech initiative, accompanied by a picture of their smiling family, fond. He traced the faces of the children he shared blood with, knowing he would never be allowed to share their lives. Back in the sunlit kitchen, Ethan walked up behind Maya, putting his strong arms around her waist and resting his chin affectionately on her shoulder. She leaned back into his steady embrace, letting out a soft, genuine laugh at something her son had just said. The cold, thin, lonely rain of Silicon Valley was a lifetime away. She had walked through the darkest night with nothing but her own brilliant mind and a mother's fierce will, and it had led her to the one place she had always truly belonged.